I think as a whole, I think Hendrick's going to be a solid team at this track. I really do expect all of their drivers to do well. Obviously, you can't factor in wrecks. You don't know if and when those are going to happen. But I really think Hendrick will be a strong team, and I think Larson will be a big part of that. What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the DK Garage. I'm Jeremy.
And I'm Joe.
Well, Joe, you bested me a little bit this last week. Your lineups did a little bit better at Talladega than mine.
It's part of the fun. You never know what's going to happen, especially at a race like that. We talked about the super speedway action kind of being chaotic. We didn't see a huge big one like
There
we
really
expected,
wasn't a big one.
but the strategy we talked about, stack the back, when you look at it, really kind of played to the advantage that we had. Casgralla getting a top six finish is huge for something. Whenever you're looking like that,
Could be good for his career long term as well. That's how you get a ride.
Yeah, he's done it a couple times, getting
A road course.
at different types of tracks too.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see how his career can potentially progress based on some of these opportunities he's getting, and just taking the opportunity and getting a good finish like that. That was huge. He was one of the key guys that you needed last week to reach optimal. He was a huge part of that at 12.38x value. Huge.
It's absolutely insane.
But somebody we were really high on, he was my number one owned driver overall, which helped me take home a little bit more money than you this week. No takedowns of any tournaments, because it was really kind of chaotic, but not as chaotic as we thought it might be.
Yeah, my approach, I did have the stack to back mostly. I had several lineups that were really stacked to back that, had we had the big one, I think would have been sitting nicely. Just didn't transpire like that. But I went a little bit more. I had quite a bit of Hamlin. I had quite a bit of Logano. And those guys were looking good. And I knew it was a risk. But we saw in the data that occasionally those guys starting up front do make the optimal. And like I said, they were running good. I mean, literally, Joey Logano was up front, and then he was on his roof. So that's very unfortunate, but that's Talladega. Hamlin did Hamlin-type things where he instead of just settling for the lucky dog, get back on the lead lap due to some pit strategy and whatnot, he tried to race his way all the way to the front at the end of the second stage and took quite a few guys out that I also had.
Yeah, you're 100% right about that, because whenever he came back, he actually got penalized twice, like you mentioned, and when he came back on the track.
I guess it wasn't strategy. It was more missteps, I should say.
Yeah, so it was really the first time we've seen Hamlin shoot himself in the foot this year. He's been so consistent, and whenever he got back on the track, he was a bat out of hell trying to make up some positions, and he got into Martin Truex and caused an accident where it took out a huge portion of the Hendrick swath as well.
All the three remaining at that point.
Which was very interesting to really see those guys all three in the grass at the same time. But
hats off to William Byron, because he still got a top finish. Second, right?
Yeah, he was great. It was one of those deals where he started fourth, finished second, and he's just been really a model of consistency here recently, and been somebody that's really impactful on not only a NASCAR or DraftKings perspective, but from a NASCAR perspective. He's taking that next step that we talked about in some of our previous episodes before the season opened up, how we were expecting bigger things from him, and this year so far, in my opinion, he's really taking that next step.
Oh, he is. From my point of view, has taken that next step, and he might even be taking a couple steps up this year. The streak of top 10s that he's on, I think, is up to 8 now.
Wow.
The 24 is back, man. I mean, it's not Gordon. It's a new guy. I didn't think that we would really get to this spot with William Byron, but it's finally paying off. And I really think him being so good at iRacing, so long, it just gives him a different, more unique perspective that guys who I guess grow up driving, it's just different for whatever reason. And I think he's finally getting comfortable in the car now that he has good experience behind the wheel. He's just doing things that a lot of these other guys aren't. And it's very impressive.
And I think you're onto something there. And what might be an extra element that's allowing him to take that next step is he's had a few years in the car now, and he can potentially communicate better to his crew chief to make the adjustments mid-race and in the race to keep him competitive throughout, instead of fading late where he wasn't getting the adjustments he needed to be competitive. Now he's able to communicate that and put the whole race together, and that's huge from a developmental point of view with these young drivers. And when you see that, that's a huge benefit for a driver and team.
And if you look at his stats last year, you might not necessarily agree with this, but I think the year that he had with Chad Knaus was phenomenal. Obviously, he was finally able to get his first win. Was not doing the things that we're seeing him do this year. So you'd think, well, Chad Knaus, I mean, he's obviously doing better with the new one. But I just think everything that he was able to learn with Chad, obviously Chad's still working in the organization. But I think the communication that he has with the crew chief he has now, which I think was his crew chief in the truck series, I think it was. So they have chemistry already. He can communicate well with him, but I think what he's learned with his time with Knaus, I think that's finally paying dividends. And I think he's becoming a legitimate threat this year for a deep playoff run. I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but, I mean, him and Denny Hamlin have just been stringing together these top tens. That's not easy to do.
Yeah, it's not easy, and it's something that we'll have to wait and see and how it all ultimately plays out. Speaking of Chad Knaus, he's the gentleman that's in charge of racing over at Hendrick. And going back to Talladega, something that you don't see very often, Hendrick messing up right out of the gate with Kyle Larson. And it was something as simple as moving a piece of equipment that should have been removed. And if we were in a practice scenario in a typical environment of racing, this would have been discovered before the racing event. And unfortunately, it happened to him. And he didn't cook that engine right out the gate.
And it was unfortunate because I rolled the dice with Larson as well. I thought he was in a good spot. Again, I know it's a gamble, but I think he was starting 12th, so he still had some PD upside. His teammate, the guy we just talked about, finished second. So I don't think it was a bad gamble, but it's obviously a gamble. And for that to happen right out of the gate, as good as that team's been so far this year, that's very disappointing, not just because I was playing them, but just, I mean, like, how do you do that? I mean, you're legitimately has set yourself up as a championship contending team. Yeah, we all know Talladega is a wild card race, and you might have finished last regardless, but at least go out trying. Don't kill yourself at the beginning of the race for a simple misstep. Now, I don't know how or why it happened. I'm not going to sit up here and try to crucify anybody because I'm not in that position, but at that level, you just can't make those type of mistakes. I mean, this could be one of those things that he might be needing just a couple of points late in the year for maybe the regular season championship. And because he finished 40th, that kills it. We don't know.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how much of an impact this stuff has over the long term, because with Brad Keselowski winning at Talladega, we now have 9 different winners out of 10 events. That's a lot, and it's really impactful when we only have 16 drivers available in the playoffs. Are we going to have 16 different winners by the time it
if we have 16, that's fine. If it's
more,
that's 17 or more, that's where it's going to get a little interesting. Then I guess points come back into play, and it's not necessarily win if you're in. So a guy like McDowell finishing 3rd, that's huge for him.
That was major. Having started 23rd, getting another top 10 finish is big, and it helps him make that jump in the points to be in a spot potentially, if we do see more winners, maybe be able to get in on points if that's necessary at that point. It's going to be really interesting to see how all this stuff shapes up, because Alex Bowman finished 38th, Joey Logano finished 39th, we had Kyle Larson finish 40. These guys that we've been talking about that have been fast and moving up in the playoff run, now this week will be starting further back in the field, and it could cause this to, I guess, potentially worsen, make it a little bit more of a worse situation for them, or they could just go ahead and just move up to the front.
Yeah, if you check out our slate review that we put out every week, highly encourage you to do it because it really is good, and I'll give you all credits because you really came up with that, and it really is nice and clean. But since we started doing this, I have not seen this much red and negative numbers on a sheet. And again, that's Talladega, but like you were talking about, that sets up for an incredible next race because starting position is determined on a metric that NASCAR uses that factors in a lot of different data points. But finishing position is a big metric. This slate that we'll talk about here in a minute is just packed full of great value spots for drivers. When we talk about our impact in the race day rundown, I got a lot of high numbers for a lot of drivers. Talladega has set up Kansas to be one heck of a race for DraftKings and just for watching on TV. I'm super excited about this race.
I'm so excited to get onto that. But before we do, what I really want to talk about is we spent a lot of time last week talking about optimals.
Yeah.
Optimal lineups were a key piece that we utilized to go back and kind of be a blueprint for what we how we approach the race. And we take a step back in that slate review that you just mentioned. That's available on our Patreon. The optimal lineup this week had Brad Keselowski. He started 10th. Kevin Harvick, who was my second highest owned driver, he started 16th at 9,600. That opened a lot of opportunities to fit some of those $8,000 range drivers into your lineup, which were key with Matty D, 8,200 getting 55 points. That's almost 7x.
And getting, they said it was his first stage win of his career, right?
I believe that was correct. Him and Bubba Wallace both got their first stage wins in that race, which was very, very exciting to see.
Yep.
And surprising from a NASCAR angle, but not too surprising from a DraftKings angle, that Michael McDowell 7,200 was also in the optimal lineup. He was
great super speedway racer.
Yeah, he was at almost 9x. Needed him. The Kaz Grala play 5,800, 72 points almost, and that was over 12x, which is huge value.
I'm not surprised he did well, but that far exceeded my expectations of what we would see from Kaz. And hats off to him, man. And
it's exciting. Yeah. Colleague is going to be full-time in the Cup Series starting in 2022. I've been a huge fan of Colleague just because it seems like they're so down to earth and are very open and just fun, entertaining people. Their Xfinity teams have been very, very, very strong. Mm-hmm. And having Kaz come up and do the spot races here and there for Colleague, it's just been fun to watch and see the progress of that team.
Like you said, I mean, their Xfinity program is great, and if they're able to do something similar to that in Cup, that's just going to make Cup more exciting. We're going to have a legitimate another contender for top 10s, you know. And if did they say how many cars they were going to run? Or is it 2, 1?
I haven't seen. I know of at least one.
Okay, so that's going to give other guys who are trying in the Xfinity who are good, that's going to give them a great Cup opportunity. Maybe Kaz gets in there. Maybe we see Allmendinger jump in there for 1 year to try to get the program going. And then they're doing it with the new car, the next gen car, Gen 7. So I'm really excited about this move by Colleague, and I can't wait to see who they put in it.
Getting back to what we were talking about,
optimals.
The last driver that was on the optimal was Anthony Alfredo. Very surprising to me. Even without the big one, he was able to have a strong finish and finish with almost 9x in value, which I didn't have a lot of Anthony Alfredo because I was kind of concerned he would be either in the middle of the big one, causing the big one, or just
a victim by it.
Absolutely. And it was just not something somebody I was really keen on playing too much. There were so many other guys that felt a little bit more strong than what I was, and I wasn't as comfortable with Anthony Alfredo, but he ended up finding a way to the optimal. Very impressive.
That should be some nice momentum for him and that team. I mean, again, it's super speedway racing, very different. The great thing about it is it is kind of an equalizer for equipment because of the draft. He drove his way through there. He did avoid some wrecks. Hats off to that team, Anthony Alfredo, and maybe this will be a thing that, like I said, kind of helps set the rest of the season. Maybe he can get a little momentum going and not be such a victim to parts failures and just getting caught up in someone else's mess or just making a mistake himself. I think maybe it's just what that team needed to kind of have a solid rest of the year.
Yeah, it could just be the boost of confidence that he needed to take that next step and be ready for the next event where we're going next, and it's going to be interesting to see how he takes that next step. Anything else that you wanted to touch on at Talladega? I know it was that's one of the most fun events I look forward to every year's super speedway action. Now we're moving on to different types of racing. What was your favorite part about Talladega?
It's just the racing in general. It is one of my favorite races to watch. I knew going into it, it's a wild card race for lineups. You plan for the best and you hope for the best, but you kind of expect the worst. And it wasn't a terrible day, but wasn't a profiting day either. So I'm not mad by it because it was a heck of a race. The only thing that really disappointed me, honestly, was we've talked about this, and a lot of people will agree. I really just wanted to see Matt win that race. He was in position late, and I don't know if it was his spotter told him to move up to get that second lane's run and block it, or if he saw something and wanted to do it. And to be fair, that run was there. It was coming. Tyler Reddick didn't finish it. He did not give, I think it was Harvick might have been up there. I forget who it was, that car that was coming up on the high lane. But he didn't give him the push. He got out of his way, and then he still had the opportunity to give Matty D a push. He tried to make his way around it. He didn't have the momentum or anyone to go with him. Reddick, that is. So for Matt, it didn't work out, and Brad won the race. So for me, overall, the race was good. Didn't like it from the DK perspective, but it is what it is. And then obviously Matt just not quite finishing it off was a little disappointing. But overall, I'd still give this a solid score of a race. I enjoyed it. How about you?
Yeah, it was a blast. I enjoyed watching it. Super Speedway action just reminds me of all the fun memories I have as a kid, kind of just seeing them wanting to be a NASCAR driver growing up, just seeing them inches away from each other. It was just brought me back and just enjoyable. The kids were there watching the race for part of it. Of course, you can't keep them to sit still for 3 hours, but it was a lot of fun. It was enjoyable. I had a decent payday, which definitely helps make a better weekend. But I'm excited now to kind of get on to a stretch of the season where we'll get some 1.5 mile action. We're coming up to some road races. Things are going to get interesting. This week we're in Kansas, though. 1.5 mile track, one of those type of tracks that people refer to as a cookie cutter. There's a few of these styles of tracks, so there's a lot of data and information available to us, and we dove deep this week. I think spent a good bit of time trying to find some information that allowed us to hone in on some drivers that might not be on everybody's radar, and I think we did a good job this week.
Well, I mean, only time will tell on that one, but I am excited. The cool thing about this track is there's obviously some drivers who we'll get into that stand out, but it's a fairly balanced amongst several drivers. There's a lot of options, and then when you factor in the starting positions of these drivers because of what happened at Talladega, it makes it that much more interesting. But even if you take that away, several drivers have 3 wins, but then there's a few with 2 and then several with 1. So it's not when we go to a certain track and it's like, okay, it's probably these 2 or these 3 guys. And then you're just trying to build around those. And then if they happen to not hit, then you're really kind of screwed. there's options, and I think we'll see. Ownership's going to be really interesting this week. I think it's going to be very evenly spread out, which might give everyone just a little bit more fair of a chance, especially if you're not a 150 entry max type player. If you just only played 20 lineups or whatever, I think you're going to have a much better shot of really taking some money from these big whales.
I would think this week, like you're alluding to, if there is a week to go a little heavier than you would, I think this week would be, because again, you want to manage your bankroll. Don't ever supersede what you are comfortable playing. That's never wise. But this week, there are so many drivers at the top and a lot in the middle that have a path to value very easily, that I think that you can have a balanced approach. And if the strategy on the racetrack and your strategy align, that you could really be able to take down a tournament or place better than these guys that are taking a lot more stabs at it with a different optimizer approach or whatever the case is. You have this week, I think, just as ample chance because of the diversity and selection of paths to value that you could really hit a home run.
So I think we should kind of set the scene, because we're going to have to spend some time with these drivers, but let's kind of let everyone know this is a 400-mile race, so that's going to work out to 267 laps. And we already mentioned it's a mile and a half. 186.9 potential performance points. So we will need guys getting fast laps and laps led. But like we said, PD is going to be big this week too, but we'll get into that. There will be a comp caution. I'm not sure if they've released it. It'll most likely be between like 25 and 30 laps in, which that's really going to shuffle some stuff up. But the stages themselves are 80, 80, and 107. And the last time we were here, Joey Logano won. This was a playoff race, and we didn't know it at the time, but this race, with Joey Logano winning that race, it sealed Kevin Harvick's fate. He did not have a good Texas race the week after, even though he was leading when it was raining and hit the wall because they didn't call a caution. And he didn't do well, didn't do good enough at Martinsville. So Logano, because he finished second in this race, Harvick did. So Logano, he kept Kevin Harvick out of the championship race here at this track. So this is going to be a good race.
I would hope it's a good race, because if it's not a good race and you're a driver, then come playoff time, it's a bad scenario for you, because this is one of the key races come playoff time, like you alluded to with the Logano situation and Harvick last year, that if you're able to come away and survive with this race, you've got a lot of good information to apply in the second race. That I think is one of the final races to determine the Final Four again. So it's going to be very impactful to take your lessons and be able to survive this thing and move on. But I think
just to let everyone know, it is the third round, and the only thing that changed is it's not the first race; it's swapped with Texas, so it's the middle race in the third round. So. You win here, you lock yourself into the championship race.
That's a very big thing to have done. People are going to try to take this and run with it, but very similar.
This is a preview race for everyone. Everyone's going to be taking extra notes at this race. This is an important race for everyone who's already won and who thinks they will be a legitimate championship race team. They're going to be extra focused on this race.
Absolutely, because similar to Texas, I consider this track almost a wild card in the way that it races. So some of these guys in the middle of the pack or the middle of the slate have an opportunity to reach that value. Is there anybody else or anything else you want to touch on in regards to the preview for this race, or do you want to get into the drivers?
No, I think it's time to get into the drivers. They know what to expect now. Let's talk about them. I think we have to start off at the top of the salary board, and a guy we've already talked about, Kyle Larson. He starts 32nd because of what happened. We've already talked about that. He's starting 32nd. He's a previous winner here. I would think he's going to be one of the highest owned guys because he offers one of the best PD upside out of any of the top tier teams. He's going to be one of my favorite guys to want to play. 11,300 is going to make him a little bit difficult because there's so many good plays. But how do you not want to play Larson this week?
I don't have a reason to not play Larson this week. It's there is everything I am looking at in any perspective that you want to look at, from NASCAR to DraftKings to anything. He pops off the charts everywhere. Unfortunately, last year he didn't get to race at both events here at Kansas. We don't have that information and data to go off of, but we do have his 4 previous races that we've pulled a sample size of. His average finish is 7.3 in the last 4 events here. 2 of those have been top 5s. Just one of those guys that has the ability to take everything or get everything out of his race car. We talk about that every week, but this tire package that they have this week is not as you'll be able to abuse your tires a little bit more, and I think Kyle Larson will utilize that to his full advantage. And this is something that, starting as far back as he is, if he's able to get a top 5 and potentially even lead some laps, watch out. That's huge value.
I think as a whole, I think Hendrick's going to be a solid team at this track. I really do expect all of their drivers to do well. Obviously, you can't factor in wrecks. You don't know if and when those are going to happen. But I really think Hendrick will be a strong team, and I think Larson will be a big part of that. I won't be surprised if he gets up there and leads, 20, 30, 50 laps. We already mentioned there's going to be comp caution, so he can easily get in the top 20 by the time that happens. He may even be top 15. Then you get a good pit stop from your pit crew, maybe move up another couple spots, and then you're right back in it. He could be top 5, even leading this race legitimately by the end of stage 1. Now, will he? We'll find out. But I think the way this track races, the way he can race, the speed that we've seen from this team. I mean, they won Las Vegas, were really good there. That's 1.5 miles. A little bit different style track, but it's still 1.5 miles. I think Larson's going to be very, very good this week.
Yeah, the tire packages they're running was the same one as in Las Vegas, so that will be something in his favor potentially. Joey Logano's on the salary board next. He's starting towards the rear of the field too, starting 29th. Somebody that has been on a path of dominance at times, and then finds himself upside down last week, which was unfortunate because he had a great car and looked to be very, very fast and was going to potentially be there at the end to contend again. But unfortunately, we didn't get to see the full extent of what could have been that
Super
week.
Speedway racing. So,
what are you expecting this week from Logano?
I think he's either going to be top 3 or probably somewhere between 13th and 16th. That seems to be about where his data puts him. He's either up front, leading, winning, or contending for the win, or he doesn't have that great of a day and finishes kind of mid-teens. Even if he does finish mid-teens, that wouldn't be a terrible day since he is starting 29th. I will definitely have Logano in my lineups. I don't necessarily like him as much as I like Larson and some other guys we'll talk about. But him starting 29th at a place that he literally just won at the most recently, and he has other wins besides just that one. He has good history here. Yeah, Logano's completely in play this week, and you definitely, if you're going to play multiple lineups, you're going to want to use him for sure.
Yeah, he's a guy that, based on what you just said, is a key piece to this week. Could go one way or another, unfortunately, just like any of these drivers. But if you alluded to the career wins, there's 3 guys that have 3 wins here out of active drivers. That's Denny Hamlin, Joey Logano, and Kevin Harvick. three mainstays, three champions that you're accustomed to seeing winning lots of races. Again, I like Joey Logano. I think he's got a lot of upside starting back there. So with the way that the salary board is this week, there's going to have to be some diversity there at the top, and you're going to have to make some choices. But again, these guys are going to be the mainstays that you're going to need in your lineup. So make sure that you have a couple of these guys mixed throughout, because Denny Hamlin's next on the list, and he's starting 20th. Another place differential play, another guy that's been pretty consistent on mile and a half, especially this year. He's been really consistent throughout the year. Last week was really his worst race to date.
And he was still up there when he did it, so it wasn't like performance was the issue.
Yeah.
It was really the biggest thing is him messing up on pit road twice, speeding coming into pits. It's the same thing that his teammate Truex did. So it wasn't the car's fault. It wasn't really even the team's fault. It was literally Denny Hamlin's fault, all of it.
And if he can correct
and that's not uncharacteristic for his career. So
yeah,
he's going to have those races. Just expect it from him.
We've played DraftKings long enough to remember the days where Denny Hamlin was a liability week to week. This year has been great to be able to have really strong consistency, and he kind of went back to a little stint last week where he had his uh-oh moment finally, which he hadn't really seemed to have this year, and we thought that it might happen eventually. We saw it. I don't think he strings very many of those together because of how fast his race car is, how much more experience he has as a driver. I think this week there's a couple more plays I like a little bit more than Denny Hamlin, but by no means am I fading him. I like him a lot with that place differential.
20th, and he's essentially been almost top 5 every race in multiple style tracks. You got to like him. Now, I will like to point out, if you take the last 5 spring and last 5 fall races at Kansas, his stats are better statistically in the fall, in the second race. He has a win in both the spring and the fall within the last 5 for each. So it's not like he can't get it done, this weekend. But I would say if you're going to look at, if it really comes down to, Hamlin and then some other guys, that would be potentially the deciding factor for me. Is statistically he seems to perform a little bit better in that second playoff race,
which is big when you need it to matter.
Yep.
But we're in the spring race, so we want it to matter this week. The next guy on the list, the former champion Chase Elliott, 10-4, starting 17th, another guy that was in an accident in Talladega and has to start further in the back. Even though he was able to race a little bit more and make up some position, he's starting 17th. It's going to be an interesting spot for him. I like him this week because I think this style of racing makes him feel a little bit more in control, a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more confident. I think based on some of the numbers that we looked at, he's got some success here. He's got the 3rd best driver rating in the last 6 here. Somebody that starting 17th, I like that path to value.
He is right there with Hamlin in the spring and the fall. He tends statistically to do better in the fall. He's averaging a 13.2 finish, which is actually better than Hamlin in the spring. But when you go to the fall race, he's averaging 8.8. So statistically, there is a difference there. Also, driver rating, he's rated much higher in the second race than the first. But I think, like I said earlier, I think this is going to be a good race for Hendrick. And we haven't seen Chase the last few weeks look very good. The team seems to be struggling. I think this is the week that they start to remind everyone, we're still here. We are the defending champs. And if you look at last year, you go back and look at some of the stats there, they didn't really turn it on until late in the summer. That's fine, because that's when you want to start really showing your strength anyway, carrying that into the playoffs. So I think that even if they don't hit it this week or in the next few weeks, I'm sure they're going to hit it once we start hitting the road courses. They already look good at the first one this year. But personally, I think that this will be a race that Chase does very well and can likely be contending for the win. And like I said, kind of reestablishing himself as a favorite again.
I have to agree with you on that one. I think this is the right point of the season with especially the kind of the change of track styles that we're going to be rolling into over the next few weeks. It could play right into his hand. So I like where you're coming from there. But you mentioned Hendrick. Next guy on the list, Alex Bowman.
One of my favorite plays this week.
Starting 25th. It's a good track for him, too. You want to talk about some of the data that you were all over this week?
Well, he finished third in the most recent race in the playoff, which, hey, again, if he's still alive in the playoffs, that could play big. But let's see. If we look at the last 6, he's averaging an 8.5 finish in the last 6 overall, 2 top 5s, 4 top 10s. These aren't, let me back up. He is the 11th best driver for driver rating, so he's a little far down on driver rating, but his finishes are consistently good. He's not having terrible finishes. He's got a good enough driver rating. Starting where he's starting at 25th spot, with so much PD upside, if he hits another top 10, that's boom, you're there. He may not get out front and lead. He may not be the dominant play like potentially Chase Elliott could be, or maybe his teammate William Byron or Kyle Larson. We haven't really seen Bowman, at least this year, become dominant. He got his win late. He passed Hamlin late in that race. So we haven't seen that from him, but we have seen him start towards in the mid to rear pack and then move up and look fast at the end of the race when it counts. Top 10, decent price tag this week. Great stats, one of his better tracks for sure. I think a lot's lining up for Bowman this week, and maybe he does get his second win of the year. I legitimately, it could happen. I just don't think he will dominate if he does get that win. But
that's pretty bold.
Yeah, I know.
But I like it because we both give him a 9 on our impact score, and the impact is something that we go through specifically in our race day rundown that we release typically the morning of race day, and that goes through driver by driver, our breakdown, and gives a score on a scale of 1 to 10 of how impactful we think these guys will be on the race. And me and you both giving him a 9, I think really alludes to that point that you just went on, that we really think he could be a key factor this week. Martin Truex next, starting 15th. He's a guy that is in an interesting spot. He's been fairly consistent with his finishes. This week, what are you viewing it as? Because I'm on an 8, and I think I'm comfortable with him, but there's so many other guys above him and below him. He's just in this weird range, but I think he's somebody that if it hits, it's going to be great, and he could go a little bit under-owned compared to some of the other guys. I think that's why we're a little bit on him compared to the guys right below him starting 1st and 7th. He just offers a little bit more value than those guys.
He's one of the better drivers here at Kansas. He doesn't have a win in the last 6, but he does have 3 top 5s. So there's a 50% right there that you're hitting in the last 6. And then he's also got 5 top 10s. So he only had 1 race outside of the top 10. That's really good. Average finish, I don't know if I said it, but average finish 7.3. So he's already got PD upside there. He has 2 wins this year already. He's looked fast. He's been pretty good on 1.5 miles in general. If we look at last year, and we take large ovals, so these are going to be Kansas, Atlanta, Texas. We're not looking at Homestead style track. It's a little different. But if we look at those types of tracks for last year, Martin Truex ranks 2nd amongst all drivers in driver rating. He, out of those 8 races, 4 top 5s, 7 top 10s. Very impressive. A driver rating of 110.1. Averaging 20, almost 30 fastest laps, and then he's averaging 40 laps led in those races. Now, obviously, that data is a little skewed one race to the other. But he's ahead of guys. There's only one guy ahead of him, and that's Blaney, and we'll talk about him in a second. But he was ahead of guys like Harvick, Elliott, Logano, Kyle Busch, Brad. Hamlin's actually pretty far down there, but he actually had a win at one of those tracks. This is, I think, a really good spot for Martin Truex. And because, like you mentioned, he's only starting 15th, maybe this is one where he only gets maybe 10% ownership in some of these big GPPs. If he hits, wow.
That's wild, and that's a lot of information that you just gave us, because it could be a big impact on how this is shaking up, because I do see him potentially kind of being in the middle of all these guys above him and all these guys below him that have a really good path to value as well, and he could kind of just fall in the middle and just be forgotten. But with the data that we've been able to dive into, and being that there is a lot of information available to us for the 1.5 mile tracks, being able to hone in on information like that you just pointed out is awesome, because this is impactful.
And I had forgotten about this, but I just took a peek. He was one of the optimal drivers in the first Kansas race last year, so the same type of race. Now, it was later in the year because this came after the COVID break and all that, so a little different time of the year. That may or may not matter. We'll find out. But he started 5th and finished 3rd, and he still made the optimal and had a value of 6.75.
Yeah, that's big.
Yeah. So he didn't win the race, but he was fast and he led laps, and he started 5th and still made it. And he starts 15th. You're getting a potential extra 10 PD spots or more, really, actually, if you consider the finish. So I like Truex quite a bit this week, for sure.
Can't disagree with you on that one. The Brad Keselowski starting first. He's going to be in an interesting position because you need him to lead some laps, because of the place differential with everybody else surrounding him. It's not as easy to the path that you need for that value point that we're looking for, but it's not something that can't be done by any stretch of the imagination.
Well, obviously, starting first, that's a nice spot to be in. The problem is there's no practice, so we don't know if they're going to unload properly, if they're going to have everything right. We've seen how good William Byron is. He's starting 2nd. Obviously, as of right now, we don't know if any of these guys will be failing tech. So when it comes to guys like Brad, Byron, I'd even consider Blaney a little bit, not as much, but definitely, those first 3, 4, 5 drivers, if they go to the rear, you're going to need to reconsider a little bit, because they may not get back up to the front and dominate like you're going to need them to, because there's so many good PD plays. They may not be able to make it up like they might on a more typical week. So I do like Brad. I think he will probably be fairly low owned. He's not one of the guys you really jumps out at you necessarily at this track. So I think it's a solid lower ownership play here, and that you might be able to stack with the guys we've already talked about.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting where he kind of falls into our approach and to different people's approach this week, because starting first is not an easy path to value unless he is dominant. But Ryan Blaney, his teammate, starting 7th.
I do want to point out real quick, just so that way everyone realizes, like, he is still good at Kansas. I mean, his average finish in the spring race, the last 5, is 5.8, including a win, 3 top 5. So you still got to factor everything we just said, but Brad is still good enough to get out front, lead laps, and be potentially optimal. Just want to point that out real quickly about Brad.
Absolutely. Ryan Blaney is next, his teammate, starting 7th. Somebody that I know you mentioned earlier that you wanted to talk about a little bit. What was something that you wanted to hit on? Because it's starting 7th. It's going to be an interesting spot for him.
It really will. And this was just something that jumped out to me when I was talking about Truex and the 1.5 miles last year on tracks similar to this. Him and Truex were the top 2 guys for driver ratings, but neither of them got a win. And I found that a little strange, that them being so good and so consistently really dominant at those kind of tracks. They didn't get a win, but yet here they are at the top of the driver rating board. So something to consider as we progress through the season. This week is a little difficult when it comes to Blaney, though, because Kansas hasn't been the most friendly to him. Now, starting 7th, I think there's some room for some little PD upside. But I really think you're going to need him to get out front and lead some laps, which he's capable of doing. He can certainly do that. But in the last 6 overall here, his average finish is 20.7. And 2 top 10s, 0 top 5s. Blaney could be, again, a nice pivot from some of these other guys we've talked about and may talk about later on as a lower ownership option. But I am going to have a little bit of hard time wanting to plug Blaney in this week over some of these other guys. It's not the best track for him.
It's not, and to your point, we're at that 20.8 finishing spot. That allows him to have the worst negative place differential of any driver in the field at minus 14.8, which is very surprising, especially when he's been very consistent this year. But there are tracks that we alluded to in a couple episodes ago that he seems to struggle at. This seems to be one of them. I don't know why, but it just seems to be one of the tracks that he's not been able to perform at, and that is impactful coming into the playoffs and everything. But this year, I think he has a little bit more of this figured out, and I think it could be a little bit better for him this time around. But it's still somebody with everything else that we've talked about with the place differential upside on some of these guys. It's going to be challenging to want to fit him into my lineups as much as I do with some of these other guys.
Well, and I had to double check. He's the guy who won at Atlanta, which is a similar track to this. So maybe they do have a little bit more figured out this year than they did last year. Obviously, only time will tell. I like Blaney, but like I said, I'll be playing a little bit off of his previous history because there are some other drivers that I prefer. But you got to point out that he did win at Atlanta, a very similar track.
Kurt Busch is starting 28th, another guy that's got some place differential potential starting back in the pack. I like that he has that upside. He's got some decent numbers here at 1.5 miles. I do think that I would, even though he's priced up at 9,300 this week, I feel comfortable playing with him a little bit more than somebody like Kevin Harvick maybe, or even William Byron, because of those two guys starting 2nd and 4th. It's going to be challenging to basically figure out which guys in this $9,000 price tier are the ones that you want to have exposure to, because there's so many different ways that you could approach this.
Well, it's tough because Harvick is really good here. In the last 6, he's got the highest driver rating overall, 120.6, and then the next guy would be 108.3, and that's Larson. Now, that's only his last 4 compared to the last 6. A little different, but still, that's a big gap. And he can lead laps. He's averaging almost 60 laps led and near 40 fastest laps average in the last 6. So Harvick he's not the PD play, but you're expecting him to get out front and lead laps. Something we haven't seen from him this year, so you got to factor that in. Same thing with Byron. I think you're looking at him to just have a good, solid top 5, top 10 finish. But again, with that price tag, you got to have him lead some laps. He'll get fastest laps, I'm sure, but you got to have him up front. That's the big iffy point. Kurt Busch, his average finish in the last 6 races is 14th. In the last 5 spring races, his average finish is 9.2. So then once you start factoring that in, if Harvick is not the guy, even if he has a good finish, maybe even leads a few laps, but doesn't hit more than 30, 40, 50 laps, he's likely not going to be a better play than Kurt Busch. And the same thing about William Byron. Got to like Kurt Busch quite a bit, and he's been fast this year at different tracks. He's just had some really bad luck. If he's able to keep it clean, I think we'll see him competing right around that top 10 spot. Do you feel any differently about that?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head there, because I think Kurt Busch is a solid play this week. I've actually given him a 9 on my impact score, because I think he has so much upside and is just somebody that, based on where he's at with the price range, really sticks out to me.
One thing I just wanted to ask you, I mean, we've both been doing this for a good little while now. Can you think of a time, or how many times can you think of, where Kurt Busch was more expensive than Kyle Busch?
Not very many.
I honestly can't think of any. I don't think I can,
because Kyle Busch has been so dominant that now Kyle Busch is $8,600, man. $8,600.
Starting ninth, yeah.
I can't think of a time I've seen Kyle Busch priced this low. He's starting ninth. We've given him the green flag in our race guide. That link is below. It's a great piece of literature, if you will, that pairs nicely with what we were talking about here, but it gives you a visual perspective of all the numbers that we're talking about, and really helps you get a good visual of some of these things that we're going over. And we have a portion in that race guide that focuses on the driver spotlight, and Kyle Busch being a green flag for us means we're pretty confident that he has a solid path to value, being 8,600 starting ninth. I like him because it feels like I say this every week, but someday, one race, he's going to hit pop, and you're going to hit a home run. Starting at ninth and 8,600, man, that's so cheap for Kyle Busch. And I think, based on a lot of the numbers that we saw here, this could be the race that he can finally get it on track, maybe.
Well, like you said, one of these weeks, his team is going to give him a car that's not killed right off the bat. Every week is always something. He'll hit a pebble and it's killed, and he'll still get a decent finish. It's just he's not dominating races like we typically see. So everyone is thinking that he's in a slump, which he is. But we'll point out, last year, his worst year, I would say, one of his worst years. We just didn't see in very recent memory. If you look at, again, the stats, the mile and a halfs, similar to Kansas, in those 8 races, his average finish was 9.8. Okay, not super impressive, but he did have a win. Came at Texas. Say what you want about that. Here's the thing. 5 top 5s out of 8 races. 62.5%. That doesn't sound like a slump to me. That still sounds pretty good. His average fastest laps in those same 8 races, 18.3, and he even averaged 21.6. Those weren't maybe consistently across the board. One race a little better here, one race worse. Still, average driver rating of 100.3. Again, I don't think that that's a slump. And then when you factor what he's done at here at Kansas, in the last 6 overall, 3 top 5s, 50%, top 5 finishing percentage, average finish of 10.2. That's not bad, and a driver rating of 104.2. I mean, those are solid numbers. Even in the slump numbers, those are solid. And then when you factor in the fact that he's 8,600, I think you got to, just because that's so cheap, I think you got to have some Kyle Busch this week, just because I do think it's a little bit of a mispricing. I think he should still be in the 9s, and I think it's only because of all the other really good PD upsides. I think this is a great week to be sneaky with Kyle Busch.
And I like the fact that you pointed out that his win was at Texas earlier in the episode. I said this is very similar style of racing and track as Texas. Could be the difference maker this week. Moving on, I think we can skip a couple drivers. I want to talk about Christopher Bell.
Oh, that's who I wanted to bring up, but yeah, okay.
$8,000, starting 8th. What was so impactful that you wanted to bring him up? Because there's a couple things that I know I like about him.
Well, there's some of it's probably going to be similar to you. I think it's just, I mean, there's not a lot of data to go off of with him. In the 2 races, he had one good race and one not so good race. Let's see, I can't find it right off the bat. Really, the reason why I like Christopher Bell, I just think this is a good overall track for him, or style of track for him. I think the team they're on, and a big portion of it honestly just comes down to his crew chief, Adam Stevens, who's had so much success with Kyle Busch, where all those numbers we just talked about came from, or a part of that equation. They're doing good. I think he will be easily overlooked because of all the other great PD plays we've already talked about, and some we haven't talked about. Mine isn't necessarily as data-driven as more of just what my eyes have kind of seen so far this year, and then also what we've saw him do in Xfinity for those years he was in there. He was a very dominant driver. I think this is a good spot for him.
Yeah, I think we view this very similarly because I think the crew chief driver combination is great, and strategy this week is going to be very, very key to how the race gets affected. So whenever you've got somebody that has the experience that Adam Stevens has, and the driving ability of Christopher Bell starting 8th, not having to be in that mess of cars behind him, being able to have decent restart capabilities, I think it could be a good spot for him. I've given him an 8, I believe, in my impact score, which is a solid score for somebody in his position.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm at an 8 as well. Again, it's not that much data driven because, I mean, he was in different equipment last year, and he only has 1 year of Cup experience. And with being in the lesser team, it's not really fair to factor it in. Again, it just has to go with what we've seen so far this year. I like him. I like him a lot. There's a lot of good guys we'll kind of touch on, I'm sure, in our race day rundown and skip a few drivers. I know Eric Jones will probably be favorite. I just say right here, I won't necessarily say why, but I like Matty D this week. I think it could be, and this is a good style track for him as well. But I think the next obvious potential play that people are going to want to look at is going to be Austin Cindric, starting 38th at $6,700.
Yeah.
I've never seen someone, I mean, what was it, a couple weeks ago, he was in the same position. I think he was $2,000 more. I get it. There's a lot of guys starting in the back that are really good and have the experience. To me, that seems like a really good bargain at $6,700 for Austin Cindric at a track that I think he can be very good at.
I agree. Do you have the Atlanta stat in front of us? Because he was able to race at a track earlier in the year that he started, obviously having to start in the back based on the metrics that NASCAR does, implements this year. This allows him a great path to value if he's able to get a finish similar to what we saw at Atlanta. I think it was a top 25 finish.
22nd.
22nd. So say if we give him a 20th finish this week, that's huge value-wise. Even if you give him a 22nd place finish, he's going to reach 5X very easily, and he's not having to do anything outside of that. So at $6,700, the path to value is there for Austin Cindric, and he's in Penske equipment. That's no slouch. I think he's got, based on what you mentioned earlier too, being a couple $1,000s off of what we saw him a couple weeks ago, he's going to probably be pretty chalky.
It will be interesting to see because I know a lot of people are going to want to have these high-priced PD guys, and this guy's cheap, so you can have another PD. So it's going to be interesting to see how it works out. But I mean, obviously, you're not going to see improvements every race. But I would think that this being, I think, his 3rd or 4th race in the Cup now, why couldn't he be a little bit better? Learning, just being more comfortable with the car. I'm pretty sure I had don't follow Xfinity as close. I'm pretty sure the Xfinity is racing here at Kansas as well.
Not 100% positive on that.
Okay. Either way, I think Cindric will need to be in at least a few of your lineups. 6,700. That's just so cheap for someone in, like you said, good equipment. One of the top drivers in Xfinity. Another race under his belt. I think he's a solid play this week. I really do.
He's in a great spot, and I think two drivers below him, Ross Chastain and Daniel Suarez, are also in contention for place differential plays. And me, I'm all over Daniel Suarez compared to Ross Chastain. There's a price difference, not as much PD, but I think he's been very surprising in his speed. The unfortunate part is his pit crew is, I think, 28th on this scale, which hurts him. But if they can clean that up just enough to get him in a position when it matters late, he's shown that he has speed. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I favor Suarez as well. I think at some point we'll be speaking a little bit more highly of Chastain. I think he just needs to get a little more comfortable in the car. I don't really know what's going on there. Unfortunately, Fox, the guys, they don't really talk about him too much, so it's hard to really know what's going on with that team. The biggest thing I've seen with him, it just seems like we know this about him. He's aggressive, and he's gotten into some drivers, and they've gotten back into him. So his biggest issue is, I think, just running his own race and keeping it clean. I think he can get a good finish, but I am with you. I like Suarez a little bit more. The pit data that you just gave is unfortunate and alarming. If this race comes down to a late race, green flag, pit stop, or even a caution, sometimes even cautions are worse because you're another second or so off. You might get passed by way more more cars. That is concerning, but I have liked what I've seen from that team. That team seems to be fast. Suarez is a solid driver. I think he could get a top 15, and if he can do that, that's going to be solid value.
It could potentially be, and being that it's RCR-related equipment, it's not like he's driving a bus out there. I think he could potentially be kind of sneaky. There's not very much value towards the bottom of this player pool. I think really one or two punt plays available to us that have any sort of confidence. My punt play, I think we both really are only on Anthony Alfredo at this point. I think based on the recent performance has not been that great, but the price tag at $4,500, starting 22nd, he could have a car that's in the 20th to 25th speed-wise potentially. So he doesn't have to do a lot to get you a handful of points. But, again, it's a punt play. I'm not super comfortable, but if you need the price tags, that's where I would go.
I think in general, I would say, this week, Corey LaJoie would be the bottom that I'd want to go. 5,500 starting 26th. That's typically the range I would go, because normally you don't see a guy or a driver in, even though it's not the best equipment, in the type of equipment that Alfredo's in, priced as the cheapest guy at 4,500. I'm not comfortable playing Alfredo based on what I've seen this year that much. I don't have a lot of confidence in it. I know he can wreck and he could screw you. But because of all the guys that we've talked about that were pretty expensive, and I think they could all be viable, I think Anthony Alfredo, if he can, like you mentioned, just finish around where he starts, if he improves, amazing. That's awesome. Even if he goes back a couple spots, just what he opens up the rest of the salary board for you, I think it might be worth it, but it is still a pretty, in my opinion, fairly high risk factor. We'll see if they're able to carry any of that Talladega momentum into this race, and if they do, I think it's going to be a solid play. I don't know if he might just make optimal just because of all the other guys that he opens up. It's not because he has a big day. I think he could just be at 5.5 value, which we wouldn't typically see a guy like that in the optimal. But man, if that allows you guys like Larson and Logano and some of these other guys that we've talked about, you're going to need them.
Dude, that was a golden nugget because that strategy is going to be key, and I think that in a GPP environment is the key to unlocking some stuff. So
we'll see. I'll see how it plays out. I hope
we'll see what happens. But no, I like that approach. I think that's great for GPP environment. It could be a way to be different for sure. Yeah, I'm excited, man.
I think this is a great episode, and it made me more pumped up for the race because I don't know what's gonna happen. This is almost like a Talladega race in the sense of you just don't know what it's gonna be. You don't know how it's gonna unfold, and with so many guys, good drivers starting in the rear, and there's just so many options. I think it's gonna be fun watching these fast guys go through the field. I hope Fox is able to catch a lot of this action, but they'll have their hands full for sure because there's gonna be action all over the track. I wish we were going to this race. I think this would be a fantastic race to attend.
That's why they put it towards the end on the schedule. I think it's going to create the chaos and the drama that everybody's looking for. But man, this was fun putting this together. I know we've been doing this for a handful of weeks now, so getting a little bit more comfortable and confident with it. But we definitely appreciate everybody out there that's liked and subscribed to us, and it's just something that we love to see and want to continue that natural growth. We do this as fun. It's a little hobby of ours, and we work full-time jobs and just have a little bit of money to play with on the side, but we can grow this thing with your help, and if you would like to help us, we've got a Patreon. That link is below. But the best way to do that is like and subscribe here on YouTube. If you're listening on the podcast, thank you. Please like and subscribe there. If you could share any of this with your friends on Facebook or Twitter, that's great. We're on all of those platforms. The links are below in our descriptions. Again, the race guide, you want to tell them about that? That's something we work on very hard as well throughout the week that's available.
Yeah, you'll be able to see the links below for that. It's just a digital magazine that we just try to cram basically everything that we just talked into a really nice kind of, I want to say short, but it sounds kind of bad. I mean, there's 6, 7, 8 pages in there, but there's so much information. It's so easy. We try to make it as easy as we can for people to take all of this data and information and be like, oh, that stands out to me. That stands out. That's easy to read. Oh, I get that. Instead of you having to spend several hours every week going through the race history, going through the drivers, what we've seen so far. I mean, we do put a lot of time into this.
It gets rid of the spreadsheets that everybody else has, and it's a visual perspective to pair along with this. And I think we try to do a good job of providing both those angles. But again, that's down below. Do you have anything to add to wrap this up?
No, I think that's it. I think we covered everything. And again, we're just appreciative of everyone who's already subscribed and liked and left a comment. And I think that's all I got to say. You got anything else?
Man, I'm ready to get the show on the road. So for Jeremy, I'm Joe. This has been the DK Garage. We'll see you next week.